Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm smiling because I'm thinking of election night, and my son Duncan and my son Robert were on stage playing AC/DC for me, so that was really exciting. Thank you, Senator Grassley. Those were very kind words, and at least half of what he said about me might have been true. But thank you very much. The one thing you will know within 5 minutes of meeting Senator Grassley is that he cares about Iowa, and he cares about the people of Iowa, and there's nothing false or disingenuous about Senator Grassley, and you're very lucky. Now, I met your other senator. Am I allowed to say anything about him? So I've met him a couple of times, and I'm a nice person. We've had nice, cordial relations. But I met him on the floor, and we had a few words in a debate, sort of a debate. And I tried to explain to him that, you know what? We could build a lot more schools and a lot more airports if we didn't have to pay Chicago union scale wages in Iowa or Kentucky. And he informed me that you can't have any kind of quality products made unless they're made by union workers. And I scratched my head and I said, nothing? 95% of the things you buy every day in the grocery store anywhere else are not made by a union. You need to send them all back then. I don't think I got anywhere. And so when I got to Iowa, the first thing I did is I met with your governor. He was very nice, and he's invited me over to the Capitol, and it's spectacular. And you know where I am? I'm in a double-wide trailer in a courtyard in Washington. And so at first I thought, well, why don't we get your governor to run against your other senator? And then I went to his office, and I've seen my office and his office, and I understand why it's hard to budge him out of there. He doesn't want to go to Washington. But it's also good that you have good leaders in your state who don't want to truck on up to Washington, who want to stay here and take care of Iowa. So I think that is great. And I congratulate you on your new governor. About 1902, 1903, there was a chaplain in the Senate. His name was Edwin Hale. He was also a famous author. Some of you may remember the story. He wrote a book called Man Without a Country. But anyway, he was the chaplain, and they asked him, do you pray for the senators? And he said, well, I look at the senators, and I pray for the people. We still need that, so keep the prayers. We do need that. When I was elected, John McCain called me, and he congratulated me, and I was excited to be called by the Republican nominee, and a famous war hero, and he said, the first 6 months you're up there, you'll pinch yourself, and you'll say, how did I get here with all these august personages, these famous people? And he said, about 6 months later, you'll scratch your head and say, how the heck did the rest of these guys get up here? Excluding, of course, your senator. But I had some strange things happen to me along the campaign trail. But one of the ones that stuck with me is I went to Litchfield, Kentucky. And we're a lot like Iowa. We have a lot of small towns. We're rural. I grew up in a small town. But I went into Litchfield, Kentucky towards the end, and I think we were on our bus tour. And a woman came up to me, and she grabs me by the hair and said, oh, just wanted to know if it was a toupee or not. The things you have to put up with to get elected. And I said, hey, lady, give me a break. I'm just having a bad hair day. I was lucky enough when I was elected that I get a special desk. Not because I'm a special person, it's just the way it works. I get Henry Clay's desk. It goes to the senior senator from Kentucky because he was a famous Kentucky legislator. But the senior senator is Mitch McConnell, and he's the leader and sits at another desk. So I sit at Henry Clay's desk. And I was kind of intrigued by the history of this and excited by this. So I told another one of the Republican senators, I'm going to be sitting at Henry Clay's desk. And he said, well, are you going to be the great compromiser? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about that a bit. So I did think about that. And I read there's a new biography by the Hyders about Henry Clay. And in that, I learned that Henry Clay became Speaker of the House, I think in his first term. He was president of the Senate. He ran 4 times for president and almost won. He lost by 38,000 votes to James Polk. I learned about him being the great compromiser. And I thought some about it. I mean, my history textbooks when I was growing up would say, Henry Clay kept the Union together by his compromises, by rising above sectional strife to keep the Union together. Well, that could be true, but most history has another analysis as well, and I thought, from my point of view, he kept the Union together, but by compromising over something that maybe we shouldn't have compromised over. Was it ever morally acceptable in 1850, 1840, or even 1776 for one man to own another man? He compromised at every turn. In the House, he voted and was the deciding vote to allow Arkansas to extend slavery into Arkansas. He voted for the fugitive slave law. He allowed the slave trade to happen in D.C., but he gets a lot of credit for being this compromiser. But is sometimes compromising really a misplaced ideal, an ideal that somehow we say to compromise is noble, but we don't think about what we're compromising over. He owned 48 slaves. He didn't even free most of them at his death. He was to free them 20 years after his death. So the question is, was the compromise something that was worth it? And people say, well, give him a break. He lived in 1850. He died in 1850. Give him a break. He was just a man of his times, and most people accepted slavery at that time. But the thing is there were people who didn't accept slavery at the time. He had a cousin by the name of Cassius Clay, and he was also from Kentucky, Cassius Marcellus Clay. You may have heard of the name. We later had a boxer who was named after the great abolitionist, Cassius Marcellus Clay. He was a great abolitionist, and when he would come forward to the lectern, he would put his Bible down and his Bowie knife. You didn't mess with Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay and Henry Clay parted ways, though, because Cassius Clay sort of had a take-no-prisoner style, and he released a letter that Henry Clay had written him privately, in which Henry Clay indicated really more of a dislike for slavery than he talked about publicly, and that he was probably privately more for emancipation than he let on. But he didn't really want the letter released publicly, and Cassius Clay released it, and they parted ways and never spoke again. Henry Clay didn't have any place for the abolitionist. He didn't have any place for the emancipationist or for his cousin Cassius. Cassius could really make people mad. He had a printing press, and he would print all kinds of letters and call out the slave traders. One night in a small town near Lexington, he was ambushed, bushwhacked from the back. They came at him. It was Squire Turner and his boys. He came at him from the back with knives and cudgels, stabbing him in the back repeatedly, and he falls to the ground. Squire Turner's son, Tom Turner, takes a pistol and holds it to his head and fires, and it misfires. He holds it to his head again, and it misfires. The third time he holds it to his head and it misfires, Cassius Clay has time to reach for his knife, and he guts the Turner boy and kills him. Cassius Clay didn't take any prisoners, but he fought for what he thought was right. And are there times when we should stand up and fight for what's right and not take the easy way out? I think we have to ask, who are our heroes? Are we enthralled by the great emancipator, or excited and our imagination goes to town thinking about his cousin Cassius Clay? For centuries, probably for most of recorded history, we were plagued by smallpox. In about 1721 in Boston, the smallpox plague was coming, and it was a terrible and awful disease and an awful death. Sometimes as much as 50% of the people who got smallpox would die. It came to Boston in 1721, and there was a doctor by the name of Zabdiel Boylston. And he had heard from Cotton Mathers, who was a famous minister of the time, from Cotton Mathers' slave, Onesimus, about a technique they used in Africa and the Middle East, where what they would do is take pus from someone who was surviving smallpox, who got what they called the discreet version or a milder version. They would take pus from that, simply cut the arm of the person to be inoculated and stick the pus in the cut. Sounds pretty gross, but we're not having dinner tonight, so I can tell you this. But the thing is that everybody told him it was the wrong thing to do. The establishment doctors said it would be malpractice to do it. They said it was enormously dangerous, and the person getting it could die. And there was some truth to that. But the disease was awful, and the vast majority of the town would get it and die. And so he inoculated his son. Talk about bravery. He inoculated his son. His son survived, And he ended up inoculating 221 people and saving them from smallpox, and no one got smallpox. Within a generation, John Adams, George Washington, Ben Franklin, they all did inoculation. Everybody was doing it. It became accepted. But it took someone brave enough and bold enough to step forward against popular opinion and do what he felt was right. I think we need more people like that. We need more people in Washington who will lead instead of following. I think we have a president who's not leading the country. I think we have a president who's basically abdicated in his role as leader of our country and is not doing what needs to be done in our country. Now, some would say that the issues that we deal with today have no moral equivalency to slavery or don't have the infectious urgency of smallpox. But I would say that when we think about things, there are questions we should ask. Can a civilization long endure that doesn't respect life? Will we be judged at some point in time whether we stood up and said that the law and the land should respect the unborn? Will we be judged for that? Thank you. We face a day of reckoning, not only a day of moral reckoning in our country, we face a day of fiscal reckoning. We have significant problems, and I think it's rapidly approaching, a day of reckoning where will we be able to continue to pay our bills? Will we destroy our currency paying for our bills? Can we continue to spend and spend and spend money we don't have? We're running an annual deficit of nearly $2 trillion. And you say, well, I read in the paper it was only 1.6. That's kind of true. It's 1.6, and then you have to add the other 400 billion they don't count because it's off budget. But it's a lot. I mean, what's $1 trillion? How do you even imagine what $1 trillion is? Reagan used to use the example, you put $1,000 bills in your hand, you stack it 4 inches high, that's about $1 million. But if you want to put $1,000 bills in your hand and get to $1 trillion, it would be 67 miles high. We're no longer talking about billions. Billions are passé. We're talking about trillions. And it's a problem. And here's the rub of the whole debate up there. We're talking trillions in deficit, but we're talking billions in cuts. Okay? The Democrats have offered up $6 billion in cuts for the rest of the year. What does that mean? Nothing, absolutely nothing. We borrow $4 billion a day. We spend $10 billion a day, so probably what we're going to get, the compromise, is going to be $33 billion. That's 3 days worth of spending, and it's about 2% of 1 year's problem. There's a disconnect. When I come home or I go to a tea party and I say, well, I propose cutting $500 billion. At home, you know what they say to me? They say, that's a good start. They say that's 1/3 of 1 year's problem. But in Washington, when I talk about $500 billion in cuts, they look at me as if I might have horns growing behind my ears. So there is a disconnect. We all want to balance the budget, but guess what? To balance the budget, you will have to cut spending. Everybody's got a good spending program. Some of them tug at your heartstrings. People come with terrible childhood diseases and this and that, and they all want money. One congressman who was recently elected from Michigan has a sign in his office, and his sign says, if you've come looking for money, you're in the wrong office. It is hard because so many of the programs have justification. Can we help this person or help this disease or help these people who are having trouble and struggling? The question we have to ask for each of those people who come is it justified to borrow from a future generation, or is it justified to borrow from China or Japan, or will they even continue to loan the money to us? I fear that the day of reckoning has been moved up because of the natural disaster in Japan. Who buys our debt? China's bought over $1 trillion worth of our debt. Japan owns about $886 billion worth of our debt, but we rely on their continual buying of our debt. Can Japan continue to buy our debt when they have problems at home? Will they sell our debt? Will we have to buy our debt? And the way we buy our debt is by simply making new money from the Federal Reserve. We simply print it up, but that destroys your savings and your value. Ultimately, it takes from you even the cost of your land because everything goes rapidly up through inflation. We're facing a day of reckoning, and it will take leadership. I don't think we're getting that leadership from the White House. You will get to help decide who the leadership is on our side, and you need to take it seriously. I know you do. I've been around here. I know you take it seriously. But as I told people in my primary, it's not enough just to be a Republican. It's not enough just for the Republican Party to exist. Political parties are empty vessels unless we imbue them with values. We have to stand for something. We have to mean it. Paul Kenger writes of a young man who was 11 years old. He comes home from a YMCA basketball game in 1922 in Dixon, Illinois. It's a cold evening, it's been snowing, and he finds his dad passed out on the front steps, drunk, dead to the world. He was embarrassed, he didn't know what to do, but he didn't give up, he didn't leave him there. He reached down, he grabbed a fistful of his overcoat, drug him inside to get him out of the neighbor's view, to get him out of the cold. But this young man didn't give up and say, woe is me, what'll I do? I've got these awful family problems. I need somebody to help me. I won't do anything because how can I make it with all my problems? This young man lived in 30 different cities as he was growing up. But this young man grew up to be Ronald Reagan. He grew up to be the man with the sunny optimism and the charisma that shined so brightly that it got us through the malaise of the late 70s. He had an optimism that beamed so broadly that it pulled us out of a serious recession. He had an optimism that tugged so mightily at the heart that he changed a generation of Democrats into Republicans. That's the kind of bold leadership we need. That's what you need to help us discover. We need bold leadership, people who will and can articulate the American dream. People who can understand that the American dream means that we believe in the individual, that we believe in you. When Reagan said that government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem, we need to articulate that, but articulate that we are the solution and that the solution has unlimited potential if we can get government out of the way. America's a great country. I think the greatest country probably ever conceived because we got our founding documents right. We enshrined individual liberty and freedom in our documents, and we should have respect for those documents. One of the things that I am fighting this week and will continue to fight next week is that I think the most important vote we ever take when we're up there is whether or not to go to war or not. Whether or not we send our brave young men and women to war should be something that your representatives, that we vote on. Now, President Bush got a lot of grief from a lot of different angles for the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war. But you know what? In both instances, he came to Congress, and Congress at least voted on this before we went. These are the checks and balances that our founding fathers intended for us to have. This president sets a terrible precedent to go to war without coming to Congress. He had time to go to the UN. He had time to go to NATO. In fact, I think they think the UN's more important than Congress. It's awful. He had time to go to the UN. He had time to go to NATO. He had time to go to the Arab League. He had time to consult private citizens but he didn't have time to go down to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue and consult you through your people's representatives. That's going to have to change. Senator Grassley mentioned about America being exceptional. I agree. But I don't think we're inherently exceptional in the sense that it's nothing about the color of our skin or our DNA or anything like that. But we're exceptional because of our Constitution. We're exceptional because we embraced individual liberty and capitalism. But we have to remember to obey these things. We have to remember to obey the Constitution. James Madison said that the Constitution supposes what history demonstrates, that the executive is the branch most interested in war and most prone to war. Therefore, the Constitution has, with studied care, given that power to the Congress. It was a division of power. It was checks and balances, and it was very important to our founding fathers. We need to have a debate over that. I hope to force just such a debate this week when we go back. As we move forward into the next cycle, I think that there is every chance that we can have great success. We had great success in 2010. I think we can do it in 2012. What I ask of Iowa is help us find the right person. Thank you very much.